Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Reason, Individuality which takes itself to be real, in and for itself, Reason as testing laws. A distinction within the simple ethical substance is for it an accident which appeared, as we saw in specific commandments, as the contingency of the knowledge of the circumstances themselves, and of the action. The comparison of that simple being with the determinateness corresponding to it was made by us, and in that comparison the simple substance has shown itself to be a formal universality, a pure consciousness which is free from the content and stands over against it, and is a knowing of it as something determinate. This universality in this way remains the same as what the matter in hand itself was, but in consciousness it is something else. It is namely no longer the unthinking inert genus, but is related to the particular and regarded as the power over it and as its truth. This consciousness seems at first to be the same process of testing which formerly we carried out, and it seems that its action cannot be anything other than what has already happened. Namely, a comparison of the universal with the determinate particular which previously would reveal their disparity. Here, however, the relationship of the content to the universal is different. Since the latter has acquired a different significance, it is the formal universality of which the determinate content is capable, for in that universality the content is considered only in relation to itself. When we were testing the universal pure substance, stood over against the determinateness, which displayed itself as a contingency of the consciousness into which the substance entered. Here one term of the comparison has vanished. The universal is no longer the affirmatively present and authoritative substance, or that which is right in and for itself, but a simple knowing or a form, which compares a content only with itself and considers whether it is a tautology. Laws are no longer given, but tested, and for the consciousness which tests them they are already given. It takes up their content simply as it is, without concerning itself as we did with the particularity and contingency inherent in its reality. It is concerned with the commandment simply as commandment, and its attitude towards it is just as uncomplicated as its being a criterion for testing it. But that is the reason why this testing does not get very far. Just because the criterion is a tautology and indifferent to the content, one content is just as acceptable to it as its opposite. Suppose the question is, ought it to be an absolute law that there should be property, absolute and not on grounds of utility for other ends? The essence of ethics consists just in law being identical with itself, and through this self-identity, that is, through having its ground in itself, it is unconditioned. Property, simply as such, does not contradict itself. It is an isolated determinateness, or is posited as merely self-identical. Non-property, the non-ownership of things, or a common ownership of goods, is just as little self-contradictory. That something belongs to nobody, or to the first comer, who takes possession of it, or to all together, to each according to his need, or in equal portions, that is a simple determinateness, a formal thought, like its opposite property. Admittedly, if a thing that belongs to no one is considered as a necessary object of a need, then it is necessary that it becomes a property of some particular individual, and the contradiction would stem rather from the freedom of the thing being made into a law. But by non-ownership of the thing is not meant absolute non-ownership, but that it shall come into someone's possession according to the individual's need, and moreover, not in order to be kept, but to be used immediately. But to provide for the need in such a completely arbitrary way is contradictory to the nature of the conscious individual who alone is under discussion. For such an individual must think of his need in the form of universality, must provide for the whole of his existence, and acquire a lasting possession. This being so, the idea of a thing being arbitrarily allotted to the first self-conscious individual who comes along and needs it does not accord with itself. In a society based on a common ownership of goods, in which provision would be made in accordance with the universal fixed rule, Either each receives as much as he needs, in which case there is a contradiction between this inequality and the essential nature of that consciousness, whose principle is the equality of individuals, or in accordance with that principle, goods will be equally distributed, and in this case the share is not related to the need, although such a relationship alone constitutes the very notion of sharing. Still, if in this way the notion of non-property appears contradictory, this is only because it has not been left as a simple determinateness. The same applies to the notion of property, if this is resolved into its moments. The single thing that is my property is held as such to be something universal, solidly established and permanent, but this contradicts its nature, which consists in its being used and in vanishing. At the same time, it is held to be mine, something which everyone else acknowledges and lets alone. The fact, however, that I am acknowledged implies rather my equality, my identity with everyone, and that is the opposite of exclusiveness. What I possess is a thing, that is, something which is for others in general, and is only for me in a quite general, undefined way. That I possess it contradicts its universal thinghood. Consequently, property is just as much an all-round contradiction as non-property. Each contains within it these two opposed self-contradictory moments of individuality and universality, but each of these determinances, when thought of as simple as property or non-property, without explicating them further, is as simple as the other, that is not self-contradictory. The criterion of law, which reason possesses within itself, fits every case equally well and is thus, in fact, no criterion at all. It would be strange too if tautology, the maxim of contradiction, which has admitted to be only a formal criterion for the cognition of theoretical truth, that is, something which is quite indifferent to truth and falsehood, was supposed to be more than this for the cognition of practical truth. In both the above moments, which fill the former emptiness of spiritual being, the process of placing immediate determinateness in the ethical substance, and then getting to know whether they are laws, has been eliminated. The result, therefore, seems to be that neither specific laws nor knowledge of them is admissible, but the substance is a consciousness of itself as absolutely essential being, which therefore can give up neither the distinction within it nor the knowledge of that distinction. The law-giving and the testing of laws has proved to be futile, means that both, when taken singly and in isolation, are merely unstable moments of the ethical consciousness, and the movement in which they appear has the formal meaning that the ethical substance thereby exhibits itself as consciousness. Insofar as these two moments are more precise determinations of consciousness of the matter in hand, they can be regarded as forms of the honest consciousness, which, as previously in the case of its formal moments, now busies itself with a supposed content of the good and the right, and with testing such established truth, and fancies that in sound reason and intelligent insight it possesses that which gives force and validity to commandments. However, without this honesty, laws do not have a validity as the essence of consciousness, nor similarly does the testing of them count as an action within consciousness. On the contrary, these moments, appearing each by itself immediately as a reality, express in the one case an individual establishing an existence of actual laws, and in the other case an equally invalid immunity from them. The law as a specific law has its contingent content. This means here that it is the law of a single consciousness and has an arbitrary content. To legislate immediately in that way is thus the tyrannical insolence which makes caprice into a law and ethical behaviour into obedience and to such caprice. Obedience to laws which are merely laws and not at the same time commandments. So too, the second moment, insofar as it is isolated, means testing the laws. Moving the immovable means the insolence of a knowing, which argues itself into a freedom from absolute laws, treating them as an alien caprice. In both forms, these moments are a negative relation to substance or real spiritual being, or we may say that in them substance does not as yet possess its reality, but rather that consciousness contains them still in the form of its own immediacy. and that substance is at first only a willing and knowing by this particular individual, or the ought to be of an unreal commandment and a knowledge of formal universality. But since these modes have been superseded, consciousness has returned into the universal, and those antitheses have vanished. Spiritual being is actual substance, through these modes being valid, not in isolation, but only as superseded moments. And the unity, in which they are merely moments, is the self of consciousness, which being from now on posited in the spiritual being, makes that being actual, fulfilled, and self-conscious. The spiritual being thus exists, first of all, for self-consciousness as law, which has an intrinsic being, the universality associated with testing the law. A merely formal, not an essential universality, is now behind us. The law is equally an eternal law, which is grounded not in the will of a particular individual, but is valid in and for itself. It is the absolute pure will of all which has the form of immediate being. Also, it is not a commandment, which only ought to be. It is and is valid. It is the universal I of the category, the I which is immediately a reality, and the world is only this reality. But since this existent law is valid unconditionally, the obedience of self-consciousness is not deserving of a master whose commands are arbitrary, and in which it would not recognize itself. On the contrary, laws are the thoughts of its own absolute consciousness, thoughts which are immediately its own. Also, it does not believe in them, for although belief does perceive essential being, it perceives it as something alien to itself. Ethical self-consciousness is immediately one with essential being through the universality of itself. Belief, on the other hand, starts from the individual consciousness. It is the movement of that consciousness, always toward this unity, but without attaining to the presence of its essential being. The above consciousness, on the other hand, has put its merely individual aspect behind it. This mediation is finished and complete, and only because this is so, is this consciousness immediate self-consciousness of the ethical substance. The difference between self-consciousness and essence is therefore perfectly transparent. Because of this, the distinctions in essence itself are not accidentally determinate. On the contrary, in virtue of the unity of essence and self-consciousness, this latter being the only possible source of disparity, they are masses articulated into groups by the life of the unity which permeates them. Unalienated spirits, transparent to themselves, stainless celestial figures that preserve in all their differences the undefiled innocence and harmony of their essential nature. The relationship of self-consciousness to them is equally simple and clear. They are, and nothing more. This is what constitutes the awareness of its relationship to them. Thus, Sophocles' Antigone acknowledges them as the unwritten and infallible laws of God. They are not of yesterday, or today, but everlasting. Though where they came from, none of us can tell. They are. If I inquire after their origin and confine them to the point whence they arose, then I have transcended them. For now it is I who am the universal, and they are the conditioned and limited. If they are supposed to be validated by my insight, then I have already denied their unshakable intrinsic being, and regard them as something which, for me, is perhaps true, but also is perhaps not true. Ethical disposition consists just in sticking steadfastly to what is right and abstaining from all attempts to move or shake it, or derive it. Suppose something has been entrusted to me, it is the property of someone else, and I acknowledge this because it is so, and I keep myself unfalteringly in this relationship. If I should keep for myself what is entrusted to me, then according to the principle I follow in testing laws, which is a tautology, I am not in the least guilty of contradiction, for then I no longer look upon it as the property of someone else. To hold on to something which I do not regard as belonging to someone else is perfectly consistent. Alteration of the point of view is not contradiction, for what we are concerned with is not the point of view, but the object and content, which ought not to be self-contradictory. Just as I can, as I do when I give something away, alter the view that it is my property into the view that it belongs to someone else, without becoming guilty of a contradiction, so I can equally pursue the reverse course. It is not therefore because I find something is not self-contradictory that it is right. On the contrary, it is right because it is what is right. That something is the property of another, this is fundamental. I have not to argue about it, or hunt around for, or entertain thoughts, connections, aspects of various kinds. I have to think neither of making laws nor of testing them. All such thinking on my part would upset that relation, since, if I liked, I could in fact just as well make the opposite conform to my determinate tautological knowledge and make that the law. But whether this or the opposite determination is the right, that is determined in and for itself. I could make whichever of them I liked the law, and just as well neither of them, and as soon as I start to test them, I have already begun to tread an unethical path. By acknowledging the absoluteness of the right, I am within the ethical substance. But this substance is thus the essence of self-consciousness, but this self-consciousness is the actuality and existence of the substance, itself and its will. Well, and death is the ultimate judge. We never really own anything. All my property, I just have it. And then I don't, once I'm gone. Anyway, that is the end of reason, the reason section. So now, coming up next, or at some point in the future, I will go through spirit.